That's what they're doing with their resources. You look at Asia Wilson's signature shoe, her logo, resources wasted. You look at the Paige Bueckers Nike logo. Does this look like they really wanted to do this, or they were just catering to that crowd? So they said, oh, let's just get a Paige and let's give her a logo. Let's cater to the crowd.
Right now, major corporations are lighting money on fire and pretending it's a long-term strategy. That might sound dramatic, but when you actually look at what's happening in women's basketball marketing, the disconnect becomes impossible to ignore. Brands with billion-dollar budgets are pouring resources into athletes who don't sell products, don't drive ratings, and don't fill arenas, while quietly ignoring the one athlete who does all three. And the wildest part, they know it. Over the last year, companies like Nike and Lego have rolled out signature logos, partnerships, and product lines centered around Paige Bueckers, a phenomenal player, no debate there, but one whose commercial impact simply doesn't match the scale of the investment.
It's a company I grew up with. I think many of us had these. Paige Bueckers signs a deal with Lego as she prepares to be the next signature athlete. Now, my question to you. How many kids know who Paige Bueckers is? Number one. How many kids' parents know who Paige Bueckers is? Number two. And if you're walking in a toy store, whether it's Target, whether it's a toy section at Walmart, and you see this face on a box, who knows who this is?
Critics aren't questioning her talent, they're questioning the business logic. Because at the exact same time, Caitlin Clark is doing something no one else in women's basketball can replicate. Her merchandise sells out in hours. Her games shatter ratings records. Arenas that sit half empty all season suddenly can't keep seats available when her team comes to town. That isn't hype, that's consumer behavior. So why are companies acting like this data doesn't exist? Why are marketing campaigns being built around optics instead of outcomes? Why are brands betting on recognition that hasn't materialized, while the athlete with proven demand is treated like just another option? That's the question nobody wants to answer out loud. Because once you follow the numbers, the ratings, the sales, the attendance, an uncomfortable truth starts to surface. This isn't about basketball performance. It's about narratives, it's about box checking, and it's about corporations choosing what should be popular instead of what actually is.
Bueckers' WNBA debut. Paige Bueckers' WNBA debut averaged 639,000 viewers on ION.
And when billion-dollar companies start throwing cash out of a moving car, sooner or later, someone's going to ask why. On the surface, these partnerships are announced like major wins, press releases, clean visuals, big brand names attaching themselves to the future of women's basketball. But once the excitement fades, a much more uncomfortable question starts creeping in: who is this actually for? Take the recent moves by Nike and Lego. Both brands have committed real money, real shelf space, and real marketing energy toward Paige Bueckers as she prepares for the next phase of her career. Again, this isn't a knock on her talent. By any basketball standard, she's elite. The issue isn't performance, it's reach. Marketing only works when recognition exists before the product hits shelves. That's where critics say the logic starts breaking down. Walk into a Target or Walmart toy aisle. A kid sees a Lego box with a face they don't recognize. A parent sees the same thing. No cultural hook, no instant connection. Lego built its empire on universally recognizable icons: Star Wars, Marvel, Harry Potter. Characters kids know instantly and parents trust immediately. Dropping an athlete without mass recognition into that ecosystem is a gamble, not a strategy. And the data backs that concern. Reports indicate Bueckers' WNBA debut drew a fraction of the viewership that other recent debuts pulled in. Meanwhile, comparable marketing pushes tied to other athletes resulted in immediate sellouts, waitlists, and resale markets. That contrast is what has analysts scratching their heads. What makes this even more puzzling is that brands aren't operating blind. Nike, Lego, and others have access to real-time consumer data. They know which products move. They know which athletes generate organic demand. They know which campaigns convert attention into revenue. Yet they're choosing to invest as if those numbers don't exist. Some critics believe this points to a deeper issue, that these companies are building campaigns around narratives they want to succeed rather than markets that already exist. Optics over outcomes, messaging over metrics. It looks good in theory, but theory doesn't clear inventory. And here's the key detail. This isn't about one bad deal. It's about a pattern. Multiple brands making similar bets despite mounting evidence that the return won't match the spend. That's why people aren't just questioning the decision, they're questioning the motive. Because when corporations keep doubling down on strategies that don't align with consumer behavior, it stops looking like experimentation and starts looking like denial. And once you zoom out, the next layer of this story becomes even harder to explain. If marketing decisions are supposed to follow attention, this is where the entire strategy starts to unravel. Because when you line up the viewership numbers side by side, the gap isn't subtle, it's massive. And that gap raises questions brands seem unwilling to answer publicly. When Paige Bueckers made her professional debut, the game aired on Iron. According to reported figures, it averaged roughly 639,000 viewers. That's not catastrophic, but it's also not the kind of number that justifies signature product lines, premium partnerships, or mass-market toy launches, especially when you factor in platform visibility. Iron isn't ESPN. Many casual fans didn't even know the channel existed until WNBA games started appearing there. Now contrast that with Caitlin Clark. Clark's WNBA debut aired on ESPN and averaged over 2 million viewers. That's not just better, it's in a completely different category. ESPN didn't stumble into that decision. Networks bid for games they believe will draw eyeballs. They study data, they forecast demand, and ESPN very clearly decided that Clark's debut was worth prime real estate. That choice alone tells you what the market thinks. This isn't about platform favoritism, it's about confidence. Networks don't place their biggest windows on unproven draws. They place them where the audience already is. And when you see one athlete given the widest stage while another is placed on a low-visibility network, it quietly reflects internal expectations. What makes this uncomfortable is how corporations respond to those signals. Instead of adjusting strategy, scaling investment to match audience size, brands are treating these athletes as if their reach is equivalent. Same level of spend, same rollout language, same future of the sport framing. That's not optimistic, that's ignoring evidence. And fans notice. Viewers aren't confused about who they're tuning in for. The numbers show it clearly. When Clark plays, people watch. When she doesn't, many don't. That doesn't mean other players lack value. It means consumer behavior is concentrated, and marketing strategies usually follow concentration. Usually. Here they don't. Some analysts argue this is where ideology creeps into decision-making, where companies chase balance instead of results, where campaigns are designed to look right rather than perform well, and when viewership doesn't match spend. Brands quietly move on without acknowledging the miss. But television ratings don't disappear. They stack, they trend, and once you see them laid out, it becomes impossible to pretend all attention is distributed evenly. And that's before you even look at the merchandise numbers, which paint an even clearer picture of where real demand lives. Television ratings grab headlines, but merchandise is where the truth gets brutally honest. Because viewers can watch out of curiosity, buying something means commitment, and when you look at what actually moves off shelves, the gap becomes impossible to explain away. Start with Caitlin Clark. Her Wilson basketball became the fastest-selling basketball in the company's history. Not women's basketball history, company history. It sold out almost immediately. Restocks vanished just as fast. The same pattern followed her shoes, jerseys, shirts, collectibles, and limited-run items. Everything tied to Clark didn't just perform well, it cleared inventory at a pace brands dream about. That kind of demand doesn't come from marketing spin. It comes from consumers already wanting the product before it exists. Now compare that to the rollout around Paige Bueckers, signature logos, apparel lines, announced partnerships, big branding language, but noticeably absent from the conversation, sellout announcements, restock panic, secondary market markups. There's no scramble to keep these products available because, according to critics, the demand simply isn't there at scale. And this is where the strategy starts to look backwards. In retail, especially consumer goods, companies don't usually lead with belief, they lead with proof. They test demand, they scale what works, they cut what doesn't. That's why Clark's merchandise expansion made sense. The data justified it. The market pulled the product through the system on its own. With Bueckers, it feels reversed. Brands appear to be pushing product in hopes that demand will follow, rather than responding to demand that already exists. That's a dangerous approach in any industry, but especially in sports, where fan loyalty is selective and purchasing power concentrates around a few stars. What makes this even more striking is that these companies aren't guessing. Nike, Wilson, and other major brands have decades of sales analytics, real-time tracking, and consumer behavior models. They know exactly what sells, where it sells, and why it sells, which makes the continued imbalance in investment even harder to defend. Some critics argue this reveals a deeper problem: brands treating women's basketball like a messaging project instead of a market, pushing evenly distributed visibility instead of leaning into actual consumer behavior. That might look balanced on a spreadsheet, but it doesn't work at a register. And retail doesn't care about narratives. Shelf space is finite, warehouses are expensive, unsold inventory turns into clearance racks and write-downs. When products move slowly, companies don't get credit for good intentions, they eat the loss. Which raises the next uncomfortable question. If merchandise isn't moving and ratings aren't comparable, why do brands keep committing like they are? To answer that, you have to look beyond stores and screens and straight into the arenas themselves. If ratings tell you who people are curious about, attendance tells you who they're willing to show up for. And this is where the disconnect becomes impossible to defend, because arenas don't care about branding narratives. They only care about bodies in seats. Take the Dallas Wings as the clearest example. On paper, this should be a strong market, a major metro area, a modern arena, a roster featuring Paige Bueckers as the future face of the franchise. Yet throughout the season, attendance told a very different story. Games struggled to sell out, upper sections stayed empty, tickets remained available deep into game day, and then something interesting happened. When the Indiana Fever came to town, everything changed. Suddenly the arena was full, secondary market prices jumped, fans showed up early, media coverage spiked. The difference wasn't subtle, it was immediate. And the only variable that changed was who was on the other bench, Caitlin Clark. That pattern repeated itself across multiple markets. Attendance surged when Clark's team visited. It dipped when they didn't. This wasn't a coincidence. It was consumer behavior playing out in real time. Fans were voting with their feet, not with tweets. What makes this even more striking is the scale. We're not talking about 20,000-seat NFL stadiums or massive NBA arenas. These are sub-1,000-seat venues. Filling them should be easier, yet many teams couldn't do it consistently until Clark arrived. That reality undercuts a major assumption brands seem to be making, that star power in women's basketball is evenly distributed. It's concentrated, and attendance is the most honest metric because it requires effort, time, money, planning. You don't accidentally show up to a game. Some defenders of the current marketing approach argue that attendance will balance out over time, that recognition takes patience, that fans will eventually follow branding, but history doesn't support that idea. In sports, attendance follows stars, not campaigns, always has. Michael Jordan didn't need equal marketing distribution to fill arenas. Neither did LeBron, neither did Serena Williams. Fans gravitate to transcendent figures first, then discover the rest of the sport through them. Right now, women's basketball has one of those figures. And instead of leaning into that reality, corporations are spreading resources thin. Hopping optics can replace gravity. Attendance shows why that doesn't work. You can promote whoever you want. You can announce whatever partnership you want. But you can't force fans to show up. And when they consistently only do so for one player, that's not a narrative problem. That's a market signal, and it's getting louder every week. At this point, the pattern is too clear to ignore. Ratings point one way, merchandise sales point the same way, attendance confirms it, and yet corporate strategy keeps drifting in the opposite direction. That's where the conversation shifts from confusion to intent. Because this doesn't look like bad data. It looks like ignored data. Major brands don't lack research departments. Companies like Nike and Lego operate on consumer analytics that go far beyond public numbers. They track click-through rates, conversion funnels, regional demand, age demographics, repeat buyers, and resale activity. They know exactly who drives revenue and who doesn't. So when critics ask why these companies are committing similar resources to athletes with vastly different market pull, the answer likely isn't ignorance, it's priority. More and more analysts argue this is about optics, not outcomes. About maintaining a narrative rather than responding to behavior. Brands want to be seen as shaping the future of women's basketball instead of reacting to it. That sounds progressive in theory. In practice, it's risky business. Here why. Narratives don't clear shelves, consumers do. When marketing decisions are driven by what should be popular rather than what is popular, companies end up forcing demand instead of serving it. That approach works in entertainment when studios can control distribution. It doesn't work in retail, where customers can simply walk past the product. And that's what's happening now. Instead of leaning into the one athlete who consistently converts attention into sales, brands are spreading their budgets across multiple faces to appear balanced. Equal exposure, equal treatment, equal headlines. The problem is, markets aren't equal, they're concentrated, and ignoring that reality doesn't make it disappear. Some defenders of this strategy argue that companies are investing in long-term growth, that today's losses will pay off later, that recognition takes time, but that argument falls apart when long-term growth is already happening, just not where the money is being spent. Women's basketball isn't lacking a gateway star, it has one. What it's lacking is the willingness from corporations to admit that star power isn't evenly distributed and never has been in any sport. Growth doesn't come from pretending every athlete drives equal demand. It comes from amplifying the ones who already pull people in and letting the rest of the ecosystem grow around them. Instead, brands are acting like the data is a suggestion, not a signal. And when companies choose optics over outcomes, they don't just risk underperforming campaigns. They risk eroding trust with consumers who feel marketed to and with athletes who end up attached to products that were never fully supported in the first place. Which leads to the most overlooked part of this entire situation. Because the people most affected by these decisions aren't the brands. It's the athletes caught in the middle. This is where the conversation gets uncomfortable, because the fallout from these decisions doesn't land on executives or shareholders first. It lands on the athletes themselves, especially the ones being pushed as stars without the infrastructure to support that push. Take Paige Bueckers. None of this is an indictment of her talent. She's elite. Her resume speaks for itself. Championships, accolades, big moments. But what's happening around her isn't organic growth, it's forced positioning. When brands roll out signature logos, toy partnerships, and league centerpiece marketing without matching consumer demand, they set the athlete up for backlash. Not because fans dislike her, but because expectations are being inflated beyond what the market currently supports. And when sales don't match the hype, the athlete takes the heat, not the boardroom. That's the quiet damage of optics-driven strategy. Instead of letting Bueckers build her own lane, brands keep tying her visually and narratively to Caitlin Clark. Rivalry angles, color overlaps, comparative framing. It sends a subtle but damaging message that she needs someone else's gravity to hold attention. That's not empowerment, that's dependency. True star building looks different. It's patient, it's targeted, it's honest about audience size and trajectory. It meets fans where they already are instead of demanding they show up because a press release says they should. What we're seeing now is the opposite. Athletes are being used as symbols in a larger corporate conversation about what women's basketball should look like, rather than what it currently is. And when reality doesn't cooperate, the narrative turns cold fast. We've seen this before in other leagues. Players get pushed too early, products underperform, and suddenly the tone shifts from celebration to silence. Endorsements quietly disappear, signature lines get discontinued, and the athlete is left answering questions they didn't create. Meanwhile, the one athlete who consistently converts attention into revenue becomes the unspoken measuring stick for everyone else, whether that's fair or not. That's the real trap here. Instead of allowing multiple stars to rise naturally in different ways, corporations are trying to flatten the ecosystem. Equal shine, equal spend, equal promotion. But sports has never worked like that. Fans don't discover greatness through balance sheets. They discover it through moments, connection, and repetition. When brands ignore that and push athletes into roles the audience hasn't assigned them yet, they don't accelerate growth. They distort it. And eventually, when the numbers don't line up, the question won't be why the campaign failed. It'll be why the athlete was put in that position to begin with. And that leads directly to the uncomfortable conclusion brands are trying to avoid. At some point, every industry has to face the same question. Do you follow the data or do you fight it? Right now, women's basketball is sitting at that exact crossroads, and the market has already made its choice. Consumers aren't confused. They're not undecided. They're not waiting to be educated. They've been extremely clear. Television ratings consistently spike around Caitlin Clark. Merchandise tied to her sells out at historic speed. Road games turn into sellouts. Social engagement dwarfs league averages. None of that required a coordinated corporate campaign. It happened naturally because fans connected to something real. That's the key difference brands keep missing. You can't manufacture connection. You can only respond to it. What's happening now feels like corporations attempting to override organic fan behavior with messaging, as if enough ads, logos, and partnerships will eventually convince people to care at the same level. But attention doesn't work that way, especially not in sports. Fans don't choose stars because they're told to. They choose them because they feel something, because moments stick, because performances repeat under pressure, because the product delivers every time it's on screen. And when brands ignore that reality, they don't reshape the market. They fight it. That's why this situation keeps producing the same outcome: big announcements, muted response, disappointing numbers, and awkward silence afterward. Then another announcement, another rollout, another attempt to reset perception without addressing behavior. The uncomfortable truth is that women's basketball doesn't currently have a demand problem. It has an allocation problem. The attention exists, the money exists, the audience exists. It's just being unevenly distributed because brands are trying to engineer balance instead of letting hierarchy form naturally. And hierarchy isn't a bad word in sports. It's inevitable. Every league has it. The healthiest ones embrace it. The NBA didn't grow by pretending every player was LeBron. Tennis didn't grow by pretending every match was Serena. The WNBA won't grow by pretending every athlete drives equal demand. Growth comes from anchors. Stars pull people in. The ecosystem expands around them. New fans arrive, then discover other players, teams, and storylines. That's how sustainable growth actually works. By skipping that step, corporations are slowing the process they claim to support. And here's the part no one likes to say out loud. The longer brands resist what the market is telling them, the more credibility they lose with fans. People notice when products feel forced. They notice when narratives don't match reality. And once trust erodes, it's hard to get back. The market isn't emotional. It doesn't argue. It doesn't negotiate. It just responds. And right now, it's responding loud and clear. The only remaining question is how long corporations will keep pretending they can outmarket gravity before they finally accept that the audience already chose and everything else needs to build from there. This is where everything converges, because no amount of branding language or curated messaging can outrun outcomes forever. Eventually, quarterly reports arrive, inventory numbers surface, engagement metrics get reviewed, and at that moment, intention stops mattering. Only results do. Right now, what we're watching is a slow collision between ideology-driven marketing and consumer-driven behavior. Corporations are making bets based on how they want the league to look, instead of how audiences are actually interacting with it. That gap doesn't stay theoretical for long. It shows up in unsold merchandise, underperforming launches, and partnerships that quietly disappear without explanation. And history tells us exactly how this ends. When products don't move, brands don't blame strategy. They pivot, they cut budgets, they reassess. And when that happens, the same athletes who were once loudly promoted suddenly find themselves without support, without follow-up, and without protection from public backlash. That's the real risk here. Not that companies lose money, they can absorb that. It's that athletes become disposable once the narrative stops paying dividends. Instead of building sustainable stars, corporations are burning through credibility. Fans feel talked down to, consumers feel manipulated, and athletes feel the pressure of expectations they never asked for, tied to campaigns that were never built to last. The irony is that the blueprint for growth is sitting right in front of everyone. One star has already pulled new audiences into the sport. Ratings prove it, attendance proves it, merchandise proves it. The market has done the hard part. All brands had to do was respond intelligently, amplify what works, then use that momentum to lift everything else around it. Instead, they chose symmetry over strategy, optics over outcomes, narratives over numbers. And the longer they resist what's obvious, the harsher the correction will be. Shareholders don't accept good intentions as returns. Retailers don't reorder products that don't sell. Broadcasters don't protect ratings that don't deliver. Reality always wins. Women's basketball is at a pivotal moment. It doesn't need forced balance. It needs honest alignment between fan behavior and corporate investment. When those two finally meet, growth happens fast. Until then, we'll keep seeing the same cycle repeat. Big announcements, muted response, quiet disappointment. The market isn't confused, it isn't cruel, and it isn't wrong. It's just honest. And eventually, every brand involved will have to decide whether they want to keep arguing with it or finally listen. This is the crossroads moment for women's basketball, and it's bigger than any single player, brand, or marketing campaign. What's unfolding right now isn't a debate about talent or fairness. It's a test of whether decision-makers are willing to listen to reality instead of fighting it. The audience has already spoken, loudly, consistently, across ratings, attendance, merchandise, and engagement. One player has proven she can pull casual fans into the sport, convert attention into revenue, and elevate the entire ecosystem simply by existing within it. That doesn't diminish anyone else. It defines the opportunity. Every successful league in history has grown by leaning into its gravitational stars, not by pretending gravity doesn't exist. When corporations ignore that lesson, they don't create balance, they create waste. They burn money, they frustrate fans, and they put athletes in impossible positions, asking them to live up to expectations the market never assigned. This isn't about choosing sides, it's about choosing honesty. Women's basketball doesn't need forced narratives, it doesn't need symbolic investments, it doesn't need companies throwing money out of a moving car just to say they participated. What it needs is alignment between what fans want, what they show up for, and where resources are actually placed. If brands adjust and follow the data, this era could mark the fastest and most sustainable growth the sport has ever seen. If they don't, the same cycle will repeat: hype, underperformance, blame, silence. The market will keep doing what it always does. It will reward what resonates. It will ignore what doesn't. The only question left is whether the people in charge are ready to accept the answer, or whether they'll keep arguing with the scoreboard.